World War II was America's bloodiest war, with over 400,000 soldiers dying from 1941 to 1945. The bravery of these soldiers will never be overlooked because of their determination to protect the American people and to safely return home to their families. During the 1940s, there was still extreme racial tension because of laws such as Jim Crow. Jim Crow was a set of laws that enforced segregation in the United States. During World War II, African American soldiers faced the same segregation overseas in the military as they did back home. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the most popular black newspaper, the Pittsburgh Courier, released an article that intertwined black equality and winning the war. It called for African Americans to either enlist in the war or to make every reasonable effort to help win the war, while at the same time calling on the government to give equal rights to every citizen regardless of race. This campaign was called the Double V Campaign, for a victory for the war and a victory for African Americans getting their freedom. Shortly after the announcement of the Double V movement, the Pittsburgh Courier published a letter from an anonymous sender, and it was titled, "Should I Sacrifice My Life to Live Half American?" In the article, the author wrote, "Being an American of dark complexion and have some 26 years, these questions flashed through my mind. Should I sacrifice my life to live half American? Will these things be better for the next generation in the peace to follow? Would it be demanding too much to demand full citizenship rights in exchange for the sacrificing of my life? Is the kind of America I know worth defending? Will America be a true and pure democracy after this war? Will colored Americans suffer still the indignities that have heaped upon them in the past? These questions and others still need answering before I join the war and sacrifice my life." Over 2.5 million African Americans enlisted in the draft, and at their highest point, there were 900,000 African American soldiers overseas fighting for the United States. Out of the 900,000 soldiers that served, 1,000 of those soldiers were the Tuskegee Airmen. They were a group of African American Air Corps officers who completed over 1,500 missions and are known to have helped integrate the armed forces. The Tuskegee Airmen did face a lot of challenges, although. They were not allowed to converse with the white pilots, so they were often dubbed the Lonely Eagles. Also, because they were not allowed to go out with white units, they were often stationary as they waited for their units to arrive. African American women also came to the defense of the nation by enlisting in the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps, or WAAC. Black women in the WAAC were labeled 10%ers because they made up 10% of the women recruited. Like black men in the armed forces, they were placed in segregated units, lived in segregated housing, ate at segregated tables in the mess hall, and received segregated training. Although black WAAC officers received officer cadet training and integrated units, all other aspects of life in the Corps were segregated. More than 6,200 women served in the WAAC. In spite of serving in segregated units and facing hard discrimination, black women served with distinction to help their country win the war. One of the leaders of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, who supported the Double V movement, Philip Randolph, organized a march on Washington in the protest of the defense industry. To not have the march happen and also to not face a public relations disaster, President Franklin Roosevelt passed an Executive Order 8802 creating fair employment practices and no discrimination in the defense or government affairs. Although President Franklin Roosevelt signed an executive order to end racial discrimination and segregation in the government defense system, African Americans were not truly integrated into the military until President Truman signed a bill in 1948 to provide equal treatment to all service members, providing the outcome that African Americans had greatly strived for.